Hey guys, welcome back to another video from MTX Audio. Today, we're going to walk you through installing our all-new audio solution for this X3 behind me, so stay tuned. Hi guys, I'd like to introduce you to our new Thunder 6 audio kit for the X3 behind me. As you can see, it's a lot of stuff. But believe it or not, it's pretty easy to install. It's all plug and play, and it comes with everything you need to have awesome tunes in your car. First off, dual 12-inch subwoofers, both in sealed enclosures that tuck away under your seats, never see them. Your amplifiers, your wiring harnesses, mounting plate for the amplifiers, the head unit shroud, pair of kick panels and all their mounting hardware, and upper 4-inch pods. But before we can put all this stuff in this car, we need to grab some tools and start the disassembly. To start the disassembly process, we need to remove the seats. We need to remove the two 13mm bolts in the front, as well as the two 19mm flange nuts in the rear. Once the hardware is removed, we can go ahead and undo the seat belts. On a side note, when you're undoing the driver's seat belt, make sure you unplug the speed sensor plug. Now that we have the seats out, it gained access to the battery. We want to go ahead and unhook the negative terminal to avoid any problems down the road. Now that we've got the battery unhooked, we're going to go ahead and remove both the passenger and driver side plastic panels from the side of the center console. Okay, now that we've finished the center console removal, we want to move to the upper driver side dash panel. To do this, we're going to need to take out 7 T30 Torx and the 2 push pins in the center, as well as any switches you may have installed. Before removing the driver's side panel from the car, you're going to need to unplug your suspension computer. Take careful note because the retaining clip is quite fragile. Alright, now that we've got the driver's side removed, let's move over to the passenger's upper panel. We're going to also be removing the 5 T30 Torx along with the 2 push pins in the center console. But a special note on this one, keep in mind, one of them has a 10mm nut on the back hidden behind the gas cap cover. Alright, now that we've disassembled the uppers, we want to go ahead and start to remove the fenders. On the driver's side, we're going to be removing 9 T30 Torx. They run all the way up the inside of the fender. There's 2 on the front, there's 1 here, and 1 hidden up here. Keep in mind, these have 10mm nuts on the back of them, and then the last one is right inside the kick panel. Now that you've got all your hardware removed, you're going to need to remove 2 retaining clips on the top inside part of your fender well. With the clips removed, lift up on the hood panel, pulling your fender back and out as you do so. With the outer fender off, you'll notice that your inner kick panel is loose. You can go ahead and remove that from the car. All right, now that we've got the driver's side fender removed, we're going to go ahead and do the passenger side. This fender is the same hardware we just took off over there with the addition of the fuel filler neck, which we'll get back to here in a second. First, we're going to go ahead and get all the hardware out. Okay, so this fender removes the exact same way as the other one, except for the fuel filler neck. What we like to do is take the top hose clamp off and leaving this rubber piece here so that you have enough material to get a plastic bag over that and seal it so you're not smelling the fumes as you're working on the car the rest of the way. And last but not least, you'll need to remove the fuse cover. Now that we've got the vehicle disassembled, we can go ahead and install our wire harness. What we've got to do is run our power and ground, our head unit power and ground, as well as its remote turn on, RGB controller, and rear subwoofer wires. Before we do that, there's a few things we have to prep before we can get these in the vehicle. All right, if you're going to use the RGB included with your kit, you're going to need to connect it to the power harness. Now the power harness is included in your kick panel packaging along with its hardware and 2 seal and solder connectors. You're going to need to connect that to the RGB controller. We simply do that by sliding this together and heating it. Now I use a butane torch, but you can use a heat gun, a cigarette lighter, or whatever you may have that conducts some sort of heat. There we go, there's one of them. And the other, and this is ready to install. All right, now it's time to install our head unit harness. In order to do that, we're going to need to drill a 1-inch hole in the very top of the dash. Now we include the hole saw in the kick panel box. If you don't want to drill a hole in the top of your dash, you can remove the cigarette lighter, which is quite difficult to do. But either way, it's going to be covered by the head unit shroud. Also, before you drill anywhere on any vehicle, check underneath and make sure there's no wires. We recommend that you drill your hole in the center where the texture stops and the smooth slope part begins. To route the power wire, we like to start at the battery, leaving just the pigtail of the fuse holder and the ground outside the center console. Run it forward, zip tying it along the way, up through the center of the dash towards the left front corner of the vehicle. That's where the amp rack is going to be located. The RGB wire, we like to start at the distribution block in the center of the center console, again following the power wire up to the left front corner of the vehicle. For the head unit, we want to run the power and ground down from the top to the distribution center where the RGB is, and then run the blue wire over to the left front corner of the vehicle where the amplifiers will be. For the subwoofer wire, start at the back of the vehicle running the single plug end on the driver's side through the center console up to the left front corner of the vehicle. The last harness we need to install is the rear speaker wire harness. This harness is going to go from your amplifier location down through the center console out to the rear of the vehicle. All right, now that we've got our harnesses ran, it's time to move on to the amp rack. The amp rack is made up of just a few simple components. Your main mounting plate, its lower mounting clamps, a small pad to keep it from resonating against the vehicle, and then your amplifier mounting hardware. But what is important about this is the orientation of the plate. This needs to go in the vehicle. So this would be the left front corner. This is the top. This is a slot that you need to slide into the plastic bracing in the dashboard, which we'll show you how to do in a second. The amps only go on one way. You're going to put your 600 on top with your gain to the curved side. And same with the 400. So we're going to go ahead and get those mounted so you can see what it looks like. Yep. Before we mount our amplifiers, we can go ahead and remove the plugs because we're not going to need them because this kit is plug and play with its own harnesses. Set them aside. And remember, when you're mounting your amps, you always want your gain side towards this curve. That way you can access them while they're in the vehicle. Okay, just a couple more things to do before we can put the amp in the car. First thing is we want to apply our compression pad to the right side tab on the amp rack. This will be the right side when you're looking directly at the amps. This is the only single tab on this amp rack. The reason we're doing this is because the left side, which is the pinch, this one is actually going to go behind and press against the plastic flange in the car, create tension and lock it in there. All right, now what we want to do is do a real quick preset on the gains. This is just to get the car playing. You can go back and do your fine tuning later. All right, we're going to want to make sure our input level is set to low. We're going to go ahead and set our gain at about 2 to 3 o'clock. We're not going to use any bass boost. The low pass frequency we want to set about 12 o'clock. Moving to the 4 channel. The front crossover, that should be on 80 Hertz. Front level should be about 2 o'clock. Rear level about 2 o'clock. And the rear crossover on high. That should get your presets done. And the last thing we need to do is get our bar clamps mounted inside the car. They're going to go on the passenger compartment chassis 2. When they're in the car and mounted, they're going to go just like this, and we'll show you how to do it. All right, now it's time to move on to the source unit. First thing we got to do is mount the source unit in the shroud. Your shroud will come with all the hardware to do this, and the hardware to mount the shroud to the vehicle. We have an upper pressure plate, the 2 lower screws that we're going to use to mount the radio. First thing we need to do is loosely get the pressure plate mounted inside the shroud. To do that, you're going to need to locate the 2 screw standoffs on the very bottom, which is actually the top, and loosely mount the 2.5 millimeter screws into the standoffs. You want to make sure the pressure plate can slide back and forth, and we'll tighten that up later. Before we can install the radio, we have to remove the long studs off the back of the radio. Next, to install the radio in the shroud, we're going to pull the pressure plate back, insert the top of the radio into the bottom of the shroud, sliding the top, or bottom in this case, forward. Using the longer of the 2.5 millimeter screws, we're going to screw the radio into the standoffs on the shroud. Now that we've got the bottom screws tight, we're going to go ahead and slide the pressure plate forward and tighten that down. Okay, at this point we're going to go ahead and connect our amplifier inputs to our head unit. They'll all be labeled front, rear, and subwoofer. From the head unit, you're only going to plug in the front and the rear RCA cables. This is also the time you would run any other auxiliary inputs or USB inputs that you want in your vehicle. Now that the input cable is installed, we can go ahead and prep the vehicle for installation. Before we can install the shroud, we need to go ahead and locate the 4 dimples in the top of the center console. Next, using a 1/8 inch drill bit, we're going to just break the surface of those dimples to allow for easier installation of the shroud hardware. Now that you've got your holes drilled, we need to make our radio connections and feed our signal cable, starting with the black end first and the RCA down through the hole you previously had drilled. These need to get routed to the amplifier area. Seat the radio into position, align your holes, and tighten down the 4 screws, 2 in the front and 2 in the back. Before you tighten the screws down, make sure all your cables and wires are tucked neatly inside the shroud. Okay, it's time for our lower kick panel pods, but before we do that, I want to show you a few cool items about these things. One, they're going to come to you fully assembled. You don't have to put anything together. There's no running wires, drilling holes, or any of that sort of stuff in these pods. Next, they're going to come with the harness that it's going to include RGB and a connection to uppers if you use them, as well as a lot of hardware. Now the reason for all this hardware is this will allow you to adjust these to perfectly fit your vehicle. So you can pull it tight, there won't be any gaps, which will cut down on any chance of anything rattling in the future. We're also going to give you the hole saw to cut the holes to route your wires and the templates to do so. Now you're going to want to cut these out so that they look something like this, and then once you do this, you can just keep them. You won't need to cut them out again. Since we're starting with the driver's side kick panel and we removed the plastic earlier, we're going to do the work on the bench. After we've got our template cut out, we slide it into place and simply mark our holes with a Sharpie. Now we can go ahead and drill these locations. Now that we've got our holes drilled, we're going to temporarily mount this back into the vehicle. All right, since this driver's side panel is kind of loosey-goosey in here, what I suggest you do is take one of these body bolts that we used from before and just put it back in the bottom corner just to tighten it up so it's not falling out while you're trying to work on it. There you go. Now it will stay in there. Next, you'll notice on the plate, on the mounting plate for the kick panels, you've got your 2 narrower holes and your 2 wider holes. The narrower holes, you can see by what you've drilled, go towards the back. So this is going to sit in like this. So what we need to do is we need to get a clamp here and a clamp here to mount this in there before we can mount the clips. So taking a look at the brackets, you have a through hole and then a threaded back end. You want to make sure, since that block is going to go right there, that you're putting your through hole out. So you're going to go ahead and snap that in. They're tight, but they're supposed to be. And then the opposite on the top. There you go. Next, we're going to loosely install the blocks. Obviously, concave part towards the bar. The longest of the 10mm bolts. You want to snug it up. I mean, you don't need a tool at this point. You want to be able to move it later on. So you just do it as tight as you can. You'll still be able to move it a little. And again, we're going to do the same thing, same block. There is no right or wrong on the blocks. We're going to tighten this down with our fingers. Get these in position. You can keep these loose. You're gonna be able to move them. So back to that bracket. 2 narrower holes go to the back. Slide that between the post, down like so. The shortest of the bolts, you're gonna screw, again, finger tight, into the bottom of the bracket, or block, I should say. This inside one is tight, but you can get in there. Just get them started. Okay, now slide it until your holes on your bracket are in the center of the holes that you drilled earlier. Now we take our kick panel and get the wires freed up. I should have brought cutters, but I didn't. All right, grab your last 4 3/4 inch 10mm. You're gonna bring this around to the front. Feed your wires through the last remaining hole in the back, like this. Reaching from the inside, you should be able to line up and see the brass inserts from the kick panel. Okay, that's it. Now those are the last ones you installed, but they're going to be the first ones we tighten before we move on to the next step. So you want to press the kick panel against the plastic panel, against the plastic of the vehicle. Tighten these all the way up. So I get a little snug, but go till they stop. There is Loctite in there, so they'll stay. All right. Okay, so here's the beauty of this. You can see all the movement in this kick panel. That's the reason those slots are in there. So we can pull this tight to the vehicle and then tighten up these. Right-handed, so this is difficult. Oops. Different tool. Same on the bottom. Actually, a wrench works best in there. By doing it this way, the clamps will align themselves to where you need to tighten them down. Last but not least, this is all snug, so tighten these down out here. Route your wires up to the amplifier location. And then you would just remove the bolt you were using to line everything up with, to hold it in there. All right, now you're ready to move on to the passenger side. Since the passenger side panel is currently in the car, we're going to take our passenger side template, line it up, mark it, and drill it. All right, it's everybody's favorite time. It's time to install the subwoofers. Dual 12s in a side-by-side. Who would have thought years ago? Anyway, these are down-firing, pre-wired, pre-terminated, rotationally molded enclosures. There are a specific passenger and driver side subwoofer, but each one of them is going to plug into the same harness that will be run from the amplifiers. As you can see, it's pretty simple mounting hardware. You're going to have a brake line wrap for any rattles. We're also going to include a skid plate vibration dampener kit, if you want to call it that. As these vehicles get older, the skid plates become looser. We're going to include a drill bit and tap along with some screws so you can tighten that back up if the output of these happens to make the car rattle. So let's go ahead, get to the car, and get these installed. All right, let's go ahead and get our subwoofer installed in the car. There's a few little steps we got to do before we can drop this thing in. First, we want to remove the 10mm bolt that's holding the brake clamp to the inside bracket. Take the bolt, remove the hose clamp as well, set that aside. Vibration tape. This was included in your hardware kit. What we want to do is wrap this around the brake line. This will prevent this brake line from rattling against your subwoofer enclosure. So to do that, it's adhesive on one side. If I had fingernails, I could get the paper off. Okay, got it. Wrap that around there. Doesn't have to be neat, doesn't have to be super tight. There's a channel in the bottom of the enclosure that this will fit into to hold it into place. That's really it. So now, the enclosure. Now this is going to go in nose first. You want to feel underneath it to make sure you've got that cable into the slot, and it'll set right down in there like so. Again, the hardware. Let's get this all started. They're going to go into the bottom hole where you took that brake piece out on both sides, the inside and the outside. There you go. So those are started. And then your rear bracket. This is going to go just like that. And it will get compressed when the seat goes in. You'll notice in some older cars, if you had your seat in the lowest position, sometimes these will actually bend backwards. So this may not line quite up. So you need to bend these back so that they're in the stock position so that everything lines up. It's really simple, a little piece of pipe or a ratchet or something. There we go, everything's in. Go ahead and tighten it all down. One cool thing about this sub box is, regardless of factory seats or aftermarket seats, you'll be able to mount in the lower position of your seat options and still be able to slide it back and forth. There's a few others that you have to lock it into a taller position. Not with this one, because it's such a shallow enclosure. Now, all that's left is to plug it in. On the harness that we ran back earlier, remember there were 2 plugs on it. Basically, at this point, you can just pick one because there is no left and right. Just go ahead and it'll only fit one way. Set it back in the channel where the other wires come through into the center console. All right, now that we've got the driver's side subwoofer installed, we're gonna move over to the passenger side. Cool thing is, it installs the exact same way, so you already know how to do it. All right, it's time to wire this thing up. Now you may have noticed you have this one plug hanging around that would have come in your core kit, which is the amp rack and power wire and all the accessories needed for that. This is the output of the 4-channel as well as the RGB controller for your speakers. This is where we like to start, which is on the 4-channel, the lower of the two amplifiers. It's a little more difficult to get to if you wire the 600 first and have to fight your way through those wires. So this is going to be the first thing we hook up. That's done. So your pigtail goes to your RGB. All right. Next, driver's speaker wire, which would be front left. Again, it's all labeled, so let's get the passenger one over here. There we go. And your rear. Snapped in. Okay, speaker wires RGB done. So next, we're going to move on to the signal input, which is this black plug and this set of RCAs. Black plug goes to the 4-channel, RCAs go to the 600. Or mono block. Okay. Next is remote turn on from the head unit. Blue wires. Doesn't matter which pigtail you plug in. That's done. So that's everything on the 4-channel except the power, which we'll do last. Moving over to the 600. The RCAs we just talked about, they're labeled sub. Red, like the black. The remote turn on, which is shared with the 400. And that is plugged in. This subwoofer harness. And then you'll notice you have one 3.5 millimeter plug left over. That's for the external bass control that would have come in the 600's box with it. Now this is going to come with a bunch of different mounting options. We have chose to put this in the dashboard in one of the knockouts that we aren't using. So for right now, we just want to plug this in and leave it in here until we put the upper in. Okay, so everything is plugged in other than power and ground, which we'll do right now. Here we go, real easy. The black ones go to the 400. The yellow ones go to the 600. Okay, those are in. Okay, you've successfully wired your system. Before you tie this up or tape any of your connections that you might want to, we suggest you test it. So you don't have to cut all those if you've missed a connection or something, but it's really simple to install this. Even as many components as it is, it's plug and play, makes it nice. Okay, it's time to install our upper speakers. These are going to utilize the factory locations and the factory grills that come with the vehicle. So it's going to look exactly the same from the outside. The enclosure itself is a rotationally molded sealed enclosure. It's going to come pre-wired. It has a high output 4-inch neodymium speaker, and we've angled these just right so they're firing back into the cabin. Comes with all the hardware you need and the zip ties to tie everything up when you're done. It's really simple to install, and we're going to show you how to do that next. All right, we're going to start with the passenger side upper panel installation. First thing we're going to want to do is trim these little plastic tabs off the back using a pair of side cutters or a razor knife. Some cars may have a little plastic piece in here. You're just going to want to remove that and toss it aside. You're not going to need it. So I use my side cutters. That's it. They don't need to be super flush or anything fancy. I'm going to flip the panel back over. Using the dimples in the top panel that are already provided in the panel, we're going to use a 3/16 bit and drill those out. All right, clean up all the plastic. Let's be all the way through, good. Okay, now we're going to have 2 machine screws and 1 plastic screw. The 2 machine screws obviously go in the metal plate, that's pre-threaded, and the 1 plastic screw. But before we do this, we want to use an 1/8" bit, which I have here, and do a shallow pre-drill on this. That'll help that plastic one seat. Not very much, just a little bit. Then we'll go ahead and hand tighten these so we get them all lined up. Okay. Sliding panel. Sausage fingers, this is difficult. Just snug it. Using a T20, I'm going to go ahead and tighten all these down. It's going to be the exact same for the driver's side. There is a computer on the bottom of that panel. You won't need to remove it or anything. There you go. Upper speaker installation. Now we'll do the driver's side. Now that we got the speaker pods in our upper panels, we can go ahead and put them in the car, but before we do that, we have to reinstall the fenders. All right, now that we've got the fenders back on the vehicle, it's time to install our upper dash pods. This is pretty easy to do. You're going to take the pigtail that comes off of either the driver's or the passenger side, in this case the passenger side, locate the pigtail that came from the lower speakers. This came up on the same wire harness that you ran before over to the amplifiers. So you simply plug this in and tuck your wires down in. Wrestle with it. There you go. All right, we're under the driver's side panel. This installs the same way as the passenger side one. You're simply just going to plug it into your pigtail. But with this panel and the heart of your system down here, we want to do a little work on the front side to make sure that we don't have to get back in here afterwards. So what we suggest you do is simply turn this over, set it into place. It doesn't have to be perfect in any way. And we're going to want to take a listen and make sure this is on so that you don't have to waste your time unplugging everything you just plugged in to go back and undo it to check what was missed. Then we'll come back, plug everything in, and button it up. All right, it's finally time to install our rear cans. Now the cans are a 6-inch sealed, injection molded, RGB two-way driver. Now, it's going to come pre-wired. The wire that you ran earlier is going to plug directly into this. It also has 3 different clamp sizes for whatever vehicle you're putting it on, stainless steel hardware, and the adjustable mounting base. The adjustable mounting base, you can see the slots, allows you to turn this and rotate it to whatever direction you want the speakers mounted on your vehicle. Forward, backwards, whatever. And then a decal to orientate to the direction that you have your drivers facing. So let's go ahead and get these on this vehicle. All right, we're finally ready to put our pods on this thing. Now, I want to show you a few pointers and tips that we use to make this a little easier. These cans have a lot of adjustment. So we try to get it lined up on our bench before we come to the vehicle. Otherwise, you got things moving in 360 degrees. First thing we do is take our base plate and we put it against the vehicle, and we know we want our speaker to face this direction. So we try to orientate the driver, and you can see on the base plate where to mount the screws. So you'll take your speaker off, mount the base plate to it, and you've already got it all set, and it's not trying to roll on you like that. So we know that this, when clamped, will line up just like that. Now, one other thing, on some of these Can-Ams we've noticed, these shocks end up in two different spots from assembly, so you might have to loosen it and slide it one way or another to make sure the can clears. Now in this case, we're fine, so we can go ahead and get this installed. First thing, you're gonna wanna snap your clamp over. Now this is the bolt, the hardware is all 10 millimeter, so it's pretty easy. This is where you need 3 hands. It's going to be like that. We're going to repeat the process on the other side and then get our wires run down, and we'll show you how to get those connected. Okay, it's time to wire our rear speakers up. You're going to take the leads from the speakers and you're going to want to run them down between the body following the chassis. Now if you notice in here, you have a chassis bar, a shock, and then the chassis and the body. We want to make sure that we're running this between the chassis and the body, not the chassis and the shock, because the shock's going to move. So we're going to try to stay away from that. I'm going to feed it down just like so. And to keep it tight, you can actually use this post as your first zip tie. And then we're going to go down below, connect it to the lead we ran earlier, and tie it up as we go. And I'll show you how to do that. All right, now that we've got our rear speakers connected, you may have noticed that there's a lot of extra harness. That's because this same harness fits your 4-seat versions of this car. But rather than leaving it in the engine compartment with the heat and the elements, we like to pull it back in and store the excess in the center console. we want to go ahead and hook up our distribution block and our battery. Now, the distribution block is going to be the head unit and the RGB controller that you ran down. You're going to want to hook those two into accessory. All right, now that we've got all those connections made, we can go ahead and install the fuse, test the system. If everything checks out, we can put this back together, reassemble it. All right, now that we've confirmed everything is good and everything works, it's time to wrestle this panel back in here, plug in our computer, our switches, and most importantly, run our EBC knob to its new location. All right, before we go any further, we want to install our EBC into the dash. We've chosen this knockout. I went ahead and drilled a 1/4-inch hole. The stem of the EBC is threaded, so you're just going to slide it through and tighten the nut, snap it in the dash, and that's it. You also may have noticed this has an extremely long wire. You've got the right one. It's only that way because people mount their amps in all different places, and we have to be able to compensate if someone has it in the back or it's in a car or a boat. So you're just gonna have to tie the excess up under the dash somewhere, but it is the right one. $10mm socket to snug it down. This has to be hand tight. Your knob back on. There you go. Your EBC is mounted. All right, now that we got this pretty little hot rod back together and rocking, it's time for me to get out of here. But like always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or just want to say hi, hit us up on any of our social media sites or give us a call at 1-800-CALL-MTX. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.